Hey, everybody. Welcome to Your Money Map, sponsored by the Alliance for Lifetime Income. I'm your host, Jean Chatzky. Very glad to have all of you along with us today. There is an old saying, and it goes something like this: find a job you love, and you'll never have to work a day in your life. For many of us, and I think I'm fortunate enough to count myself among them most days, this holds true, and it can make retiring, stepping back from work, a challenge. Today, there are an increasing number of people who are deciding not to step back from work at the traditional retirement age because they need the income. Others are retiring and then returning to work because they realize that full time leisure just isn't for them. According to one recent report, roughly 1 in 5 Americans 65 and up, age 65 and up, were employed, as in still working in 2023. That is nearly double the number that it was 35 years ago. And experts say the growth isn't expected to stop anytime soon. We are digging into this notion of being unretired, as my guest today calls it. Please, as always, whether you are joining us on LinkedIn, whether you're joining us on Facebook, jump into our conversation. Tell us where you are. Tell us what your thoughts are about retirement. If you've got a question for my guest or for me, happy to answer them always. So let me introduce you to Mark S. Walton. Mark is a Peabody Award-winning journalist, a Fortune 100 management consultant, and chairman for the Center for Leadership Communication, a global executive education and communication enterprise that focuses on building leadership skills at every age and every stage of life. You'll recognize Mark. Earlier in his career, he was CNN's first chief White House correspondent, later a senior correspondent and anchor. He traveled the globe from network headquarters in Atlanta, and he's got a great new book out. It is called Unretired: How Highly Effective People Live Happily Ever After. To write this book, Mark put his reporter hat right back on, and he crisscrossed the United States to talk to unretired CEOs, Mayo Clinic doctors, attorneys, psychologists, neuroscientists, financial experts, journalists, and many, many others about their decisions to keep working beyond traditional retirement age, about what's driving them to carry on with their original careers or different careers, about how age impacts their abilities in the workplace. And if you'd like to join the ranks of the unretired, Mark is here to fill us in on the very best way to do so. Mark, welcome to the show. Very glad to have you here.
Thank you, Jean. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
So we talk a lot on this show about people who are working longer, who are maybe phasing into retirement or just retiring and then deciding that it's not for them. As you crisscross the country exploring this topic, what did you learn, and what led you to look into it in the first place?
Yeah, let me tell you a story.
Okay.
So, like you, I'm a journalist and an author, and also run an executive education organization, as you said, with a focus on leadership and achievement at every stage of life. About 15 years ago, I started to notice, as I was in my late 50s at the time, that the media focused primarily on three stories when they were focusing on people 50 and beyond. One was best places to retire. I can still see the cover on Money Magazine.
I think I
Uh,
wrote that story more than
oh, did you
once, by the
really?
way.
I wonder if they're the same places. Well, then you've probably written the other stories as well. The next one, and I know you've paid attention to this, is what do you do in retirement to make you happy? How do you adjust to retirement? And the third story, which is the largest story, is the story of retirement finance. How do you get ready to retire? How do you manage your finances while in retirement? And then if you don't have the assets to comfortably retire, how to catch up. So pretty much the media coverage of this age group was dominated by the idea that at some point or another, everybody was going to retire. That was their goal, full stop, and that was the story we saw. At the same time, in my executive programs and others that I attended, I began to run into an increasing number of people for whom none of this applied. It wasn't even of interest to them. Uh, Many, if not most of them, could afford to easily retire, but they didn't want to. They viewed a life without work as something like a life sentence to purgatory. Uh, and I wondered a lot of things about them that interested me because it resonated with me personally. For one thing, how many were there of these kinds
Mhm.
of people? Were they outliers or were there a lot of them? Where were the numbers going? What were their characteristics? What were they like as people? What led them to this way of thinking? And what motivated them? Why on God's green earth would they want to keep working? And not just for the short term, but over the long term, when they didn't have to, when they could afford to kick back forevermore.
Well,
Those questions. Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, let's answer those questions
Yeah.
because I think
Well,
I think those are three great questions. Who are these people?
yeah, I mean, this is what it took two books to actually flesh it out. The first one was about midlife reinvention. I was looking at people in their late 50s who reinvented themselves for the long haul. They were serious about not retiring. This most recent book, Unretired, is about people who sort of a sequel. It's about people 60 and beyond. Who they are the first full college educated generation of knowledge workers. So they're people like you and me, people who've worked with their minds their entire lives. The list of professions includes everything from business to high tech to law to medicine to education to journalists like you and me. And for them, the idea of retirement was silly, is silly because they love their work, because they're fascinated by it, because when they put their fascination to work, they achieve the state of flow, which I'm sure you do when you work and when you're writing in particular. That feeling of being immersed and of having results show up that were unanticipated. And they could see absolutely no reason and can see absolutely no reason to give that all up, to give a life that they've loved up because they've reached a certain chronological age and because there's some societal construct or norm that says it's time for you to throw in the towels. As far as numbers are concerned, as you said, it's astounding. I mean, the numbers are going up all the time. And the numbers of working 65 plus year olds have increased exponentially. This group, however, is a new phenomenon. This is about half of that total cohort. So we're looking at college graduates being about 50%, and college graduates overall have made a much better living and have higher assets, right? About 50% of all working 65 plus year olds are now college graduates, and the numbers keep going up. Um, Picture this. By the year 2030, according to the government, federal government, the numbers of 65 plus year old unretired people will be equal to the populations of Los Angeles and Chicago combined. So I call it a seismic trend, and it's growing all the time.
What characterizes these people? I mean, besides the fact that let's call it a given that they like what they do. Are there are there other things that link them together?
Yeah. As their backgrounds, the nature of their work is significantly different. Um, what I found, and I interviewed a couple of dozen of them, and also about a half a dozen experts who've been studying them. And here are the characteristics that I sort of always look for patterns. That they're curious people, they're easily bored, they have been and are highly effective in their work. and they're generative, which is a fancy psychological term for they want to give back, but I prefer pay it forward. They think that their work makes a difference. They've experienced meaning in their work and they want to make a contribution. So those are their character traits, even though they're very different in the nature of their work and oftentimes in other aspects of their personality.
You talk in the book, right in the book, about how they're not in many cases doing this for the money. But just as there's a financial story to be told about people who are trying to retire, I would imagine there is a financial story to be told about the unretired. What is it? What happens in their financial lives in unretirement?
Um, I found three categories of people, and I think this is a generalization, but I think it depends on their age. Those who are older, for instance, let's take you mentioned Mayo Clinic doctors, and I interviewed a whole bunch of them. 10% of physicians at the Mayo Clinic, which is the number one hospital in the world, um, are over the age of 65. A bunch of them are in their 70s. There's a few in their 80s. They don't need another dollar. Because they work for an organization, they've made a good living, work for an organization that still has good retirement accounts set up, so forth. They're fine. And I ran into an awful lot of people in the business world, in professional careers such as that, who didn't need a dollar. Another category is people who are comfortable, who don't need additional savings, assets, or earnings, but it's fun money for them. They say, well, what the heck? Um, I can take extra trips or have a second home or whatever. I've got nothing to lose. I don't mind the income, but that's not what I'm doing this for. And then the younger group, mostly in their 50s, are close to one of those two categories. They're within a few years, they've always had financial goals and they're close to reaching those financial goals. And what they find is, well, I'll be fine as time goes on, but I don't want to kick back. That's not for me. So it covered all of that territory. Again, a very separate group from the millions and millions of Americans who truly are in trouble. There's no question about that. There's a real retirement crisis. This is another story altogether.
In telling this story, did you explore any of those people who were working for financial reasons because they actually need the money to supplement Social Security and whatever they've been able to save for their own retirement? And was there a path for them to figure out a way to take the satisfaction and enjoyment out of this unretirement that people who could come to it by choice did?
I didn't. And the reason I didn't is because that's a different story. So I didn't pursue that. What interested me, the question that I was looking for answers to is, why would people keep working if they didn't need the money? If you do need the money, it's pretty obvious that working longer is a pretty good idea, assuming that you're in a job that you like, assuming that you're in a job that is a healthy job, is a healthy environment. So I didn't have any question about that. It wasn't a mystery to me. I like to dig into mysteries when I investigate things. And it
S-
was, what are these people doing? I mean, why would they want to? Everybody wants to retire, supposedly. Why would they want to keep working? And I'm talking about for the long haul. People, as you said, who did retire, some of them during the pandemic, and said, I can't stand this. This is not for me. And people who never quit, who had kind of a sense for themselves, probably in their 50s, if not younger, that one way or another, they were going to live an unconventional life. So I didn't ask or answer those questions. They're different for me.
For those people who are thinking, I am going to retire from this job that I am doing right now. This particular career is not it for me for the next 10 or 15 years. Let's give it that sort of a parameter, maybe 20 if you're very healthy and vital. But they want to do something. How do you find the next thing to do?
Um, there's so many ways to answer that. What I found is a pattern. And when I studied people who reinvented themselves in midlife, in situations like what you just described, and also in cases where they've been forced out of the workplace younger than they anticipated, which is very common,
Yeah.
uh, that that the pattern that led to success for folks in either instance was something I call fascination. Often you hear the term love and engagement, and I like those terms as well. But fascination is different. Uh, it's a matter of being pulled forward into something that really matters to you. And I found that a lot of the fascination with which people enabled themselves to reinvent themselves may have started when in childhood. For instance, I interviewed uh, an author who, out of the clear blue, won the National Book Award. Uh, he was a physician, he was a surgeon. He'd never written much professionally, but he wrote as a kid and he loved writing. He was fascinated with the process of writing. I have interviewed people who put aside artistic fascination in one form or another, whether it was music or physical art, who put it aside to become a psychologist or an educator because those careers didn't seem to lead anywhere. So this fascination factor is what I found it, and it sounds almost like a fantasy to follow one's fascination. I know that students are told these days that don't do that, don't follow your passion. And I'm not using the word passion, and I'm not using the word follow either. I'm talking about things that actually draw you forward, that if you take the time to look at what really fills you up, what really turns you on, that you begin to potentially see a pathway to another future. And many of the folks who reinvented themselves in their 50s and later on had no real idea where they were going. They were just following this instinct, and many of them went to work for themselves. They didn't attempt to put that fascination to work in an existing structure because that may be either difficult or impossible to do. What they realized is that needed to be entrepreneurial in the real sense of the word. I think the French word entrepreneur literally means taking charge of one's life. My French is not good, but it's something like that. And so, again, and I'm sure you know this from your research, that among those who go to business into business for themselves, people, I think 60 and older are the fastest growing group and have been for a long time. So it's not just a matter of finding a job in which you can live up to your fascination, but in creating a structure that enables you to do that.
Creating a structure that enables you to do that, to become an entrepreneur or a solopreneur
Yeah.
when you are when you are essentially tasked with living on your retirement account is and social security can be a tough call. And one of the things that I know that I've always been asked and I've been very cautious about for people who want to go into their own line of business is this idea of rating your 401k in order to fund this next chapter of their life. How did these folks who were entering this next chapter structure their finances in order to make it possible for them? We talk a lot, for example, on about annuities on this show, and the idea of having a stream of protected income that you know is going to be there for you for the rest of your life, and it takes a little bit of the pressure off. How did you find people managing the challenges of starting a business, which comes at a cost, simultaneously with living in retirement?
So unlike you, I'm not a finance expert. But what I did observe is several things. One is that they didn't think they had a choice. Uh, there wasn't a job available, or there wasn't a career that they could follow anymore. So whatever the great sayings are about risk, that not taking the risk is greater than taking the risk, I think was true for them, and enabled them to move forward. Those who I know of and have spoken to and know about have been very cautious and followed the kind of advice I'm sure you would give. And in the book Unretired, I interviewed Mark Miller, who I know you know, who writes for the New York Times about
Sure.
things related to self. He's himself an entrepreneur. He became an entrepreneur in his 40s because the newspaper that he was working for didn't work and was about to fold up. But he was smart enough, savvy enough financially, because that had been his area of expertise, to realize that he shouldn't uh, invade his 401k, that it's possible to be a solo entrepreneur these days, especially with all the online technology, for very little money. There's not a whole lot of risk involved. So it's a balance. And if you're up against it and you want to suffer in a meager retirement or enjoy the possibility of continued income and possibly great success, those are the choices that the people I ran into actually made. And those who were successful followed it in a judicious, straightforward pattern. Entrepreneurship, is up and down. To get used to the
Absolutely.
fact that you don't have that constant cash flow. It takes some doing, but it's certainly feasible.
For people who don't want to hang out their own shingle, in 2023, we know that 60%, about 60% of American employers reported to giving a great deal of consideration to older workers as they look to fill positions. That makes sense. We continue to experience a very tight job market. What is it about older workers that appeal to these employers? And on the flip side, if you are an older worker, what can you do to make yourself stand out from the pack?
Well, it's great news because it was unanticipated, although it could have been anticipated. And I learned a lot about this from Carrie, our friend Carrie Hannon, who is now at Yahoo as senior financial correspondent. And what she said to me is that big businesses of all sizes are up against it. There was a baby bust in the 1960s after the baby boom. And during the baby boom, the economy expanded because there were many more of us coming into the economy, and women were coming into the economy in unprecedented numbers. So the size of the economy expanded. And then what happened is the baby boom dropped off. So if you were to project it out, you would find that there would be a shortage of experienced older workers about now. And that's what these reports are indicating. In the book, what Carrie says is what you need to realize when you go interview with them, and that is if you reach the point of being interviewed, is that you don't have to go to work for those folks. You're probably older and more experienced than they are, but they really need your experience. That the thing about you as an I hate the word older, but as a more mature person, and it happened to Carrie when she phased out of entrepreneurship into going to work for Yahoo, is that she and you can hit the ground running. You don't need training. You may need some technology to acclimate yourself to the technology of that particular business or industry. But an employer can rely on you to hit the ground running from day one. And imagine if you were an employer or a manager and you could bring somebody in who really knew what they were doing and had done it for 20 or 30 years. Would you have to pay them a little bit more money? Probably. Are they worth it? You bet. And that's what businesses are experiencing. And it's not going to go the other way again. So I've heard that from a lot of folks on both sides, right? That if you, as an older person, really want a job, if there is a job that you can do in which you would be able to experience your fascination, that would make a difference for you, you shouldn't hesitate to go out there. The standard stuff, networking and talking to people. That's the advice of Kerry and other experts in the field of job getting.
Along that same line, you write in the book that some of a person's best work, their most creative ideas, actually emerge over the age of 60. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that is?
Yeah, it's like oxymoronic. We don't expect that to happen. What I found as I interviewed folks were three categories of unretirees. The first I call rebels. These are people like the Mayo Clinic doctors and people in various businesses who managed to stay in a business or an organization doing the kind of thing they did when they started out, coming out of college or grad school. Then there's the reinventors, which we've touched on, right? Trying to find in one form or another, whether in a job or whether in an entrepreneurship, something that lights you up, that's meaningful to you, even though you've never done it before. The third category is something I call the creators. And I've found this across fields, people who didn't realize that they had creative skills and abilities within themselves. They were unaware of them. And that, again, it's very possible that these were bubbling up or latent throughout their lives, who, when they experimented with these skills in the real world, suddenly found that they were very good at whatever it is that they pursued. I saw this with photographers, with lawyers who became master photographers. I know we've heard these stories, but some of these people were as successful or more successful in a second creative career than they were in their primary career. Writers, artists, musicians, filmmakers, fashion designers, people carry these latent skills and abilities with them. And the neuroscientists that I spoke to, when I said, well, how is this possible? They said, well, of course it's possible. If you engage yourself, if you engage your brain, if you raise the bar on yourself, you never know what it is that you were meant to be doing. Perhaps you spent 30 years doing what you needed to do in terms of a job. But now the opportunity is here to find out what you were meant to be doing. And there's a good chance that instinctively you already know what it is, but you never really entertained it. You never really took the chance. It's fascinating that this happens to folks.
Stay with those neuroscientists for just a
Sure.
second, because when we talk about aging, we often talk about cognitive decline. We talk about, I mean, it's been a very big topic in the upcoming presidential election
Yeah.
on both sides, right? Is this an issue? Do we have to worry about this issue? You say no.
Because I'm a reporter, I'll pass it on to the neuroscientists. They say no.
Okay,
And
they say no. Why do
yeah,
they say no?
because there's no evidence for it. And because in the last 20 years, so, the story has always been that cognitive decline is inevitable. I know I saw your interview with Sanjay Gupta at CNN, who's a neurosurgeon, who
Yes.
talked about Alzheimer's and about dementia. Uh, Unless something like that, say the neuroscientist, happens to your brain, or unless your brain is disease, or unless your brain is injured, there's no reason to believe, except that we've been led to believe, that your cognitive abilities will decline. In fact, just the opposite. So I won't get too deep into the science. Tell me how deep I should get. But number one, there's this thing called brain plasticity, which we've all heard about, neuroplasticity, which was discovered 25 years ago by a neuroscientist named Michael Merzenich at UCSF, first studying in the lab monkeys, and then taking his experiments with monkeys to the human level And what he saw is that what nobody knew because they didn't have the imaging technology to see it is that the brain actually accommodates itself, rewires and renovates itself in response to challenges. And that works both ways. So that if you raise the bar on yourself, let's say you take a job that you don't know if you can really pull it off, or you start a business and you're not really sure, you raise the bar and apply yourself to that. The brain actually renovates itself in response to that challenge, and you find out what you're capable of. The other side of the story, which is right on the money and to the extent that we're talking about retirement, traditional retirement, the brain accommodates itself to retiring itself. So if your day went from a full, interesting day in which you were challenging yourself to a day in which you play a little golf and meet with friends and maybe drink too much and fill in the blank, right? The brain actually accommodates itself to that. It's like a muscle. This is Merzenek's analogy. It is use it or lose it. And this is new information. And those little glitches in memory, those are those senior moments. Those can happen anytime in life. Anybody can forget where their car keys are. But the fact of the matter is that by going out of your way, by living a lifestyle in which you continue to challenge your cognitive abilities, they can expand. And here's the top line and the bottom line, to the point where an older brain can be as effective or more effective than a younger brain, than the counterpart of a younger person. You can solve a labor dispute, but you may forget your car keys. They're not in the same arena.
I think I can deal with that.
Yeah.
Mark, last question. What does
Yeah.
your unretirement look like?
This. So these books have allowed me to explore new areas and follow and kind of expand my own thinking. I'm always looking for topics that nobody goes near, which always surprises me. Like this book on retirement. I mean, why hasn't anybody written a book about this before? I have people who I've spoken to who said, I don't understand. There are people, I know people like this. I've always known people like this. Why does everybody keep talking about retirement? So I've become increasingly interested after covering the big stuff in politics and the world on our with our lives, right? With human development. Whether the next book will be about this or about something else, I don't know yet. But I'll pursue whatever seems to me to be important and interesting. And like you, I love writing. So that's my unretirement. May it go on forever.
May it go from your mouth. Mark S. Walton, thank you so much. The book, once again, everyone, is called Unretired: How Highly Effective People Live Happily Ever After. Mark, where can we find more about you and your work?
Website www.secondhalfinstitute.com. Uh, that's a part of our larger organization. We do programs for accomplished people who are looking to decide what's next in their lives. Usually they're in their 50s or 60s. The content is similar to what we've discussed, and that's a good place to go to see our faculty and see the books that we've written and get a general feel for what our programs are all about. The book and the institute kind of work together hand in hand.
Fantastic. And for anybody who is watching who is not a subscriber to our newsletter, where we talk about all things retirement, please sign up. It's free, of course. You can find that at protectedincome.org/subscribe. Mark, thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, Gene.
Bye, bye everybody.